Welcome to the Sermon in the Valley with Pastor Rob Eller. You can find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast on any of those platforms and share it with your friends and family. Thank you. Welcome back to the Sermon in the Valley. Pastor Rob Eller here with your Monday sermon episode, with my sermon from Sunday, November 19th, the 25th Sunday after Pentecost. Now, normally I would do the readings along with the sermon, as is my custom, but since I used all of the readings available today, and they're all quite lengthy, to save that time, I will post a link in the description to a page that has all the readings, as well as each individual reading title by themselves if you want to look them up in your Bible yourself. So we're going to start with just the sermon. Here we go. Time. It's an interesting concept. Try as we might to exert any control over it, but in the end, it cannot be tamed by us. We think we can exert our dominance over time, but it just keeps on moving, regardless of what we do. We have this antiquated concept of daylight savings in order to force the sun to rise and set when we want, but rather than gain anything out of it, we instead feel pretty cruddy the next morning when we move our clocks ahead or back. It's hubris to think we can manipulate time when in turn it just messes with us. We created a construct of what time is, how many seconds in a minute, minutes in an hour, hours in a day, and so on and so forth. Our idea of time is a human creation through observation of other phenomena, specifically the Earth's rotation in relation to the sun and our revolutions around the sun. Even though it's naturally occurring, we still put our own interpretation and valuations on it. As I said in last week's sermon, we are in this quasi-season of the end times. We hear readings that have a darker tone to them and will sometimes make us feel uneasy. But thinking about the end of the world will do that to us. There have been many attempts throughout history to try to pinpoint when exactly the end of days will be. It seems every year there is a new prediction. Some people will start to worry about it and take extreme measures to prepare for it, like building a backyard bunker and filling it with enough shelf-stable food to last years. Or they will sell off their possessions in some irrational hope that the rapture will happen and take them away. More recently, there was the prediction that the Mayan calendar predicted the end of the world would happen on December 21st, 2012, because that was when the calendar stopped. Most likely that was the case because the Mayan civilization was destroyed before the calendar was completed. But nonetheless, many people thought that it predicted the end. So on that day, as the clock struck midnight, I was hanging out with a friend at a pub, drinking a beer aptly named The End of the World. Time works differently with God, though. We're obsessed with predicting the end of time, but our construct of time doesn't match up with how God views time. Because frankly, we could never know that. If we did, that would mean we know God's thoughts, which is impossible. 2 Peter 3:8 reminds us, "But do not ignore this one fact, beloved, that the Lord one day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are like one day." Or as the appointed psalm for today puts it, "For 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday, when it is past, and like a watch in the night." In other words, to God 1,000 years is but a day, or even just a few hours. It comes and goes before it is even recognized. We aren't the only ones preoccupied with the end of the world. In the reading from 1 Thessalonians, St. Paul is commending the people for their dedication and their faith to Jesus, but warns them to not become so obsessed with preparing for that second coming. You see, in Paul's time, and even in the time shortly after Jesus ascended into heaven, there was this belief that the second coming would happen within their lifetimes. Jesus did say in the parable of the bridesmaids last week, "Keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour." Or as St. Paul wrote, the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. So then let us not fall asleep as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. In other words, be prepared for what is to come, because we don't know when it will actually happen. But why do we eagerly want this end time to come? What is there about it that seems so appealing to us? All through scriptures, from the apocalyptic writings of the prophets to the revelation of John, we are told the end of time will not be a pleasant period. Our reading from Zephaniah today warns us that day will be a day of wrath, a day of distress and anguish, a day of ruin and devastation, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness. That doesn't sound like a good time to look forward to. It makes me think of some of those doomsday people holding the signs that say, the end of the world is nigh, making us think that these terrible things that are happening around the world are just a sign that the end is near. In the case of Zephaniah, he was railing against the elite who believed their wealth would be enough to get them through until the end of time. A pastor I know was doing a Bible study on Revelation, and she was getting lots of questions about the imagery of the book and if any of it was true or going to happen. She finally said, I have given up trying to understand Revelation. Now I'm just trying to be addressed by it. We face a similar challenge with the Zephaniah text, to be addressed by it and take it seriously, despite the over-the-top rhetoric that is used or because of it. We get so wrapped up in this that we forget what is around us. Many of us are familiar with the concept of waiting for the end times, eagerly anticipating the return of Christ, which we do in the season of Advent. While this anticipation is biblically grounded, there is a danger in becoming so fixated on the future that we neglect the present. This was the whole point of Paul's letter to the Thessalonians. He admired their commitment to waiting for the second coming, but he reminded them at the same time that they cannot neglect what they should be doing now. It'd be like a gardener who spends all their time waiting for a harvest season. They are so focused on the end of harvest that they forget to tend to the seeds, water the plants, and nurture the soil. In the same way, we cannot become so consumed with waiting for the end times that we neglect the opportunities for growth and service in the present. We remember that we are saved and then get so fixated on the end of the journey that we forget about the journey itself. Our faith is not just about looking forward to a distant future. It's about experiencing the presence of God in the here and now. Finally, we have a difficult to listen to parable from Jesus. As we notice in these end times readings, Jesus' teachings take a dark turn. Oftentimes his parables, the master or lord or king in the story is just an allegory for God or Jesus. Easy enough to understand, but in today's parable, the master gets angry and it becomes tough to reconcile that could be Jesus or God. I mean, doesn't God love everyone, and doesn't Jesus preach and minister to everyone? When we take a deeper look at this parable, we begin to realize why Jesus became angry in it. The talents given to each slave was a massive amount of money. 1 talent equaled about 75 to 100 pounds of silver, and it would take about 20 years to make at the rate of 1 denarius a day. So when the master gave out the talents, one slave got 20 years worth of wages, the other 40, and the last 100 years worth of wages. That would be absolutely unheard of and would never happen today. In reality, those talents are silver, but represent an equally great gift that has been given to each of us. The gift of the grace of God. So the first 2 slaves go off and trade their talents. Or really, they spread and share the grace given to them, while the 3rd slave buries his. He holds it for himself and doesn't share it with anyone else. The master, or Jesus, returns after being away for a long time and asks the slaves what they did with what was given to them. The first 2 are excited to say they took what was given to them and made it multiply. Jesus, as the master, is happy with those 2 slaves, inviting them in to the joy that he had in giving them more to be responsible over. The last slave, however, says that he was afraid and buried the gift he was given. He claims that he was afraid because the master reaped and gathered what was not his. Well, that doesn't sound like Jesus at all. That is, until you think about what it is he is gathering. Jesus is gathering people, and not just good and righteous Israelites. He is gathering in sinners, criminals, outcasts, Samaritans, Roman soldiers, anyone and everyone who believes and who Jesus thinks should be saved. The slave thought it was unfair that others were brought in, and therefore he didn't want to share his gift of grace with others. We all have been given this immense gift of grace, a gift worth much more than we could ever imagine. What we do with that gift really does matter. Paul reminded the Thessalonians that they needed to therefore encourage one another and build up each other, as indeed you are doing. They were on the right track. They just needed to focus on the now rather than the future. The same goes for us. Rather than passively waiting for the end times, we are invited to actively engage in kingdom living. Instead of waiting for us to go to the kingdom of heaven, we need to bring the kingdom of heaven down here. Our lives have eternal significance when we love our neighbors, show kindness, and share the gospel. Our time is limited. We need to make the most of it. John Wesley reminds us that we need to do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as you ever can. That means doing anything and everything you can to help those in need, to lend a helping hand to those who don't have enough, to stand up and speak out for those who've been oppressed, taken advantage of, or pushed aside. That means not ignoring the needs of others. This time of year we see an uptick in charitable giving and service projects because of the holidays. But we need to do this every day of every month, not just at the end of the year. The work of the church is not what happens here on Sunday mornings. It's what we do the rest of the week out there. As I said in my sermon last week, what we do here only matters if we take what we learn here and apply it to the world around us. The new year will be upon us before we know it. Let's make it one of service and love to others, bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth, and letting everyone know our faith is one of love and service for all people. And all of God's people said, Amen. Thank you for listening to this. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to our podcast. We are on multiple platforms. Share this good news with anyone who needs to hear it. The Sermon in the Valley is written and produced at the Patrick Stevens Broadcast Studio here in the heart of the Tuscarawas Valley in Ohio. God's peace be with each and every one of you. Have a blessed day.